Hi, I'm Jessie Sage, and this is the When We're Not Hustling After Party, and I'm the host of When We're Not Hustling.
Hi, I'm Emily Foster, and I'm the producer of When We're Not Hustling. And don't forget to like and subscribe.
Yeah, and follow us on socials at Not Hustling Pod. Today we're going to be talking. Right now we're going to be talking about the Shibari double episode feature that we did, which is this is the first time we've done this. We had Hunny on, Hunny Daniels, who is a friend of mine. I've done a friend of mine over a long period of time. We've both been in the industry for a long time. We both started out doing cam stuff and clips, and we've done clips together. And then we both kind of ended up in person stuff and don't do as much of that anymore. And right now what they're doing is pro sub work, which we didn't talk about that much this time, but I think it's really interesting. So maybe at some point we'll talk about that. But I had them on in particular because they wrote, they have a lot of pictures on social media of themselves in Shibari poses and tied up. And I write a city paper column called Pillow Talk with Jessie Sage. And my editor asked me to write a spread on a cover story on Shibari. And I was like, I don't know anything about that, but I know what it is. And I know people who do it, but that's about the extent of my knowledge. And so I reached out to Hunny was the first person I reached out to, and they were so excited. They were so excited about the whole thing that they made me interested in it. So I don't know, what was I know them. So I kind of knew what we were getting into.
Watching this process.
Yeah.
Yeah. This whole, for me, it was so I have two answers to that. First of all, Hunny is aptly named. They are such a little honey. They talked about a few subjects a couple of times. It struck me there was a few things they touched on that said in a different tone of voice from a different person would be quite impactful just in and of themselves.
Yeah.
There's just this effusive joy. And I was like, wait, did they just say that? And it just, okay, yeah, that's what they just said.
Yeah.
No, I think that both of these guests,
there's something almost more radical or more surprising when somebody says something intense in the sweetest voice. You're like, oh,
yeah,
okay,
exactly. There's something in that really big dichotomy that is it's unnerving, it's compelling, it's really do that again. I don't know how I feel about that.
I know. Hopefully you've already listened to the show, but if you haven't, Hunny's talking about being tied up while their friend is being beaten in another room and how that warms their heart that they're both suffering together. I think that they talked about somebody's foot being up somebody else's. I don't know. I can't remember.
There were some really intense things. Yeah. But it was said in the same tone that someone would be like, and I met a friend at the park and we hung out and we just totally bonded on this thing. And not that it shouldn't have that same vibe, but it usually doesn't. It usually, different tones are reserved for talking about that. But
I know.
I think more than anything, this whole process, I think both of these, we should have both of these guests back on because this was it wasn't an interview of you. It was an interview of them, but it was kind of an interview of your process, of your experience.
Yeah.
Which I didn't expect when we came into it. It was just
I didn't either.
You're going to write a piece. You're going to talk to some people, and of course you've got some friends. You'll talk to some riggers. You'll work out a piece. Cool.
Right.
But then Hunny with their just disarming sweetness really sparked something. And the next thing I know, you're like, I think I might I might reach out and try this. So it was like, oh, okay, well.
Yeah, it was Hunny, and it was also Milk, because who we had on part 2 of the show, because I interviewed both of them for the piece. I also interviewed 2 other riggers and at least one other person who liked being tied up. One person who's two psychologists, but both the psychologists have done rope stuff in one way or another. One is actually a good friend of mine, Celeste Petruzza, went to grad school with me, and I've used them many times. So they may come back as an expert in something. But so I really expected to get some sort of like insight into why people are into things. And I can, like, in the work that I do, I can really empathize a lot with why people would get turned on by things they do, or why they would get some sort of emotional need met through it. But it's not all the time that I'm like, oh yeah, and I need to do that too. Like, I can hear somebody say like, oh, I'm really into adult baby because blah, blah, blah. And I'll be like, yeah, that totally makes sense from your point of view. Yeah, I get that. Cool. But I don't think like, put me in diapers. Like, I don't make the next leap.
Right.
You know? So not that I have anything against that. I'm just saying that's an example of like, I didn't have that response. But for some reason, when I talked to Hunny and Milk in particular and saw like their like sheer like love for the experience, it like connected to something in me that I was like, I would love to have that experience. And part of it, I think, is that the way that they talked about it resonated with the way that I think about like sexuality. Or like,
Hunny's definition of sex was amazing.
Yeah.
You know, that there was this definition of sex that was completely outside of, almost even touch.
Yeah.
You know, touch was there, but, you know, and it definitely wasn't our, you know, boy inside of girl penetrative, you know, that's the only thing. It was like, oh no, like that's almost irrelevant in the definition.
And I also loved
it was really interesting.
Yeah. And I also really loved that what Hunny did when they were talking about that is they said, you know, a lot of people want to desexualize rope play, but for me, like, it is a sexual experience. And a lot of the reason that people want to desexualize that is because you don't want to be like, a lot of people are afraid to say like, I am having a sexual experience with somebody, you know, and that
with my friend often.
Yeah.
Like, you know, which is hard. Yeah. You know, we like it or not, we're in a pretty Puritan society and it's not easy to be like, I like things that have sexual overtones with my buddies. Like, again, as with everything, I see the younger generations getting better and better at it.
They are better.
But, you know, it is. It's still like, you know, definitely Gen X here. And, you know, cuddling with your buddies was, you know.
That would be a big deal. Yeah. I'm Gen X too. So, and you know, we didn't do that.
Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense to me why you would want to desexualize something that you might want to do with a friend. But
especially if you're in a relationship that doesn't like necessarily hold space for that. But one of the things that Hunny was talking about that I thought was really important is, you know, like relationship negotiate. You don't have to have sex with somebody like PIV sex in order for that relationship to be significant and for you to have to think about like what kind of ethical obligation you have to that person or to your partner. Like it opens up like an expansiveness for more experiences, but also more responsibility for you in how you're talking to your partner or how you're talking to the person that's tying you or, you know, because those dynamics do shift if you allow for that sort of vulnerability.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, I don't know if we've covered this yet, but we're both polyamorous. And that's something I think we're both pretty open about in the world. And like it actually is very much like the anarchy conversation. It cracks me up that the perception from the outside is often like, oh, you can just do whatever you want. It's like, oh man, we have to have more communication than most couples have about frickin' breakfast. Okay. Like we had to just, the other way around. Should have been like buying a house, I don't know. It's so intense. And
and you do have
emotional negotiation that has to happen in all of that space and
granted. You don't take the same things for granted that other couples do. So you have to.
They have the freedom to, because they're monogamous. So there's the ability to just, and I see that. I recognize it in the beauty that it is. It's not for me.
Right.
It turns out.
Yeah.
But, and I definitely, the BDSM scene and rope falls into that.
Yeah,
definitely. Has a very similar perception. Like, well, everyone's just tying everyone up and throwing blows. It's just a crazy world. It's like, no, it's so much negotiation, and not in a boring or not in a bad way.
Well, especially because the stakes are high. And that's what everybody that everybody that I interviewed.
I'm so curious about that. Yeah. I mean,
that they were all saying, this really looks like there are risks here. Like you can do nerve. And some of it isn't just, they like to talk in BDSM about like pain, not harm, and one of the things that everybody who was doing rope was saying is actually with rope, even though it looks innocuous in comparison to like impact play or something like that, there is the possibility of harm, not just like temporary pain, but you can do nerve damage. You can have all sorts of like things go wrong. And
I imagine cutting off circulation is possible. And there's, like we didn't go into that very deeply, but there was talk of like always having scissors or knives nearby because, things happen and you need to be able to just cut people out of that space.
Right. And that's what I remember Hunny really specifically saying, like, rope is, I'm trying to think of the word they use, something like rope is replaceable. People are not. It does, we just got to be able to cut that off if things get too intense. Yeah. And even when
what was it like? I mean, not necessarily, I don't need a blow by blow, but like this whole process really was, for you, an experiential shift in like you changed your mind.
Yeah, I did change my mind. It
went from like, I can't even imagine having to put up with that to like, I think I'm going to do that again.
And that was my attitude. And I should say this, that when my editor was like, will you write this? I was like, that seems so boring to me. Like you have to like sit there, like, because I like a lot of tactile sensation. And I'm like, you just have to sit there and let somebody like tie before they'll do the thing that, whatever it is that thing is. And it hadn't occurred to me that the thing was the rope tying. Like I thought, you tie somebody to do something, and then I was like, well, I just want them to do the thing. Like if they're going to pleasure me in some way, and I'm saying this from a really pillow princessy perspective, just do the thing to me. Like, why do you have to tie me up to do it? Like, I already said yes, go ahead. And I think that it was really interesting to hear them talk about it as no, like it is the thing, like doing it is the thing. That's the end in itself. And so then I started to have to wonder like, oh, so like, what is that then? And and then, so I asked Milk, so I interviewed Milk for the article. And then I said in the podcast that I was like a little nervous to like reach out to them. And I interviewed 3 riggers. And the reason that all in Pittsburgh. So like I could have reached out to the other 2. And the reason that I really liked and reached out to Milk is that Milk had been a rope bottom before they learned to rig. Like that's, so they understood the experience of being on the bottom. And that seemed, important to me. Not a deal breaker, but I liked that was part of their experience, is that they really like connected with what it was like to be the one that was tied up on a like experiential level, but also just the way that they talked about it seemed really like emotionally connected, which is something that I also, like, the goal isn't to make for milk. I mean, they obviously they want their things to look nice, but like when they were talking about it, it didn't seem to me like the emphasis was on, I want to make the prettiest ties possible. It was more like, I want to have this experience with this person. And I wanted to, know what that was like. So I reached out to them. I was really nervous because I wasn't sure if that was like against journalistic practice. I was like,
sure.
Yeah, I was like a little bit.
No,
like,
I know what you mean.
First of all, it's either, like but yeah, I don't know what I'm like. Are. Like suddenly I became like a writer, but I didn't go to journalism school. I don't know like what the ethics of doing stuff like that are. I just kind of make it up as I go along. And so I was like, I don't know. Could I get in trouble for that? I'm not sure. And so, does that make me totally biased? But I'm like, well, this is not really a reported piece. I am a columnist. It's my appearance. Like,
there was no facts that people were trusting you to relay that were hinged on your personal relationship with them. So I think it's like,
so I think it was okay, but it did go through my head that I was
after considering it, I'm like, oh no, that seems fine. But yeah, I recognize that. Like, but I was like, I don't know. Am I allowed to do that? Am I somehow? And then the other thing is, from a relational perspective, I was like, am I putting them in a weird position as somebody who's going to promote them in their city, which I'm like doing as a journalist who's like, oh, there's this person in the city. What if they don't want to work with me? And then they feel like pressure to work with me because I'm promoting them. Like in terms of a power structure, I was like, I don't know, like that feels a bit like, if they don't want to, I would feel really weird about that, you know? And so, but you get a vibe from talking to people. And I was like, oh, I kind of think that like they would be into this. So I just asked, I was like, after seeing the two of you, I'm like, well, definitely they did.
Well, okay. So I wasn't going to say this, but like, we're talking about how you have a different like reaction to people that you've had these kind of experiences with, like, regardless of, you know, what goes on outside of that. And I know that about myself. I know that about myself with my clients, with like lovers that I've had, with like my partner. Like I respond differently. I know that.
Sure.
You know, and that's normal. That's normal. Anyone who's like you've had intimate experiences with, but like, so they came over to my house, and it was funny because my editor was like, well, can we send the camera person to your house to watch this? And I was like, no. No, I don't know I don't know that person. No, I don't know that person. And I don't want to be in a, I actually wanted to have the experience. And I felt like if I had somebody like watching me have it, it was going to take me out of it. And I was going to start to feel like it was for
especially your coworker at the paper. Like,
that suddenly it was like for show and not for me to have the experience. But, you know, it so happens that I'm married to a photographer, and I never feel that way around them because obviously we're so like intimate, you know, that it wouldn't bother me for them to watch me do anything really. So I was like, but I'll do it. And so my editor was like, yeah, cool. I was like, I can do this. PJ was a little bit like, you just signed me up for a big project. Cause I'm like, what if we do like colored lights in there?
Right.
Oh my God.
Hey babe.
I know, you know, what if we do a whole photo shoot in the house that you set up? I mean, you did this.
I literally am like, honey,
you did this to your partner when you're like, would you write a song for my podcast?
I need an original song that matches this theme exactly. And I need it to be done in a week.
They love us.
They love us so much.
Yes. So yeah, PJ was like, I want to do this, but like, really, this is a lot to drop.
But next time.
And can you edit it? And can you do it by Tuesday?
Right. And can you set? Yeah. For publishing in the paper.
Yeah. You know, NBD. And so anyway,
come on.
Yeah.
You're fine.
Yeah, it was fine. It all happened. But no, it was really good. And I kind of it was really good. And I talked to them about this in the episode that we did, because I hadn't intended on having Milk on the podcast at all. But then suddenly when we were putting, this is why it's a 2-part thing. When we were putting together Hunny's episode, we were like, oh, but when we recorded this, I hadn't even considered doing it myself. And now I've done it. So maybe we should bring on the person that I've done it with and ask them about that thing. So I told Milk, I was like, we're going to have you on for 15 minutes and we're just going to tack you at the end of the episode. And we ended up talking to them for an hour. And I was like, well, that was so interesting. I'm not going to
such a good contact. It was away. So good too. Yeah. I was like, well,
okay. So now we
can't cut any of this.
No, I wouldn't do that. Anyways, I'm rambling.
It was a really amazing, 1-2 punch too. I don't know. I guess that's not the best analogy, but Hunny has just this hey, everything's actually really cool and fun. And it's really cool to check it out. And I think Hunny introduced the idea of neurodivergence.
Yeah.
And then that was sort of where you're sort of.
Yeah, it was.
I don't know, kind of came in at that place.
Yeah, well, because
go ahead. Yeah,
the reason that that was a big deal to me is that my very first reaction was, I have too much ADHD to think this is fun. I'll lose interest.
Right.
I'm very easily distracted. Anyone who's ever worked with me knows that. I'm all over the place. I do a million things at once. And I run my career like that in part because otherwise I'm bored. I need a lot of different things going on. And so the idea of just sitting there and being tied seemed fairly boring to me. And when Hunny said, oh, I do this because I'm neurodivergent and otherwise I'm bored, I was like, wait. What?
Wait a minute.
Interesting.
That sounds like the opposite.
And then Milk said the same thing. And that's what
Milk ended up really saying. Yeah.
Milk said the same thing when I interviewed them. Yeah, actually, the majority of the people that I interviewed, and I interviewed 6 people for that article, all brought up neurodivergence. And that was really interesting to me. And this isn't that surprising, given that in kink, if you are a part of kink communities or BDSM communities, they are very overrepresented by neurodivergent people. And there's probably a lot of reasons for that. One of which is probably the rule structure. If you have a hard time reading social cues, BDSM scenes that are very strictly negotiated relieve a lot of anxiety, so there's a lot of that, but also the sensory things. If you are a sensory seeking person, I would say that I am, and Hunny said the same thing. There's ways to do that in those things, in those spaces. So, the first thing that we did was a suspension, which until they came over and started talking about doing a suspension, I wasn't sure that that's what was happening. I did because I still wasn't quite sure. That seems to me like an advanced thing to do. It didn't seem like something that,
same. Yeah. Same. And
the
then idea of me being suspended in the air seems a little more advanced than just getting tied up a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. They kind of talked about suspension, and they're like, oh, you can suspend anybody. And I was like, oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. But didn't actually think that that's what we were going to do. And
that's right.
Yeah. Except that PJ had wanted to do as art projects, had wanted to do this before, but had never gotten around to it, but actually built in their studio, because they have exposed ceilings, hooks to be able to do that from. And so that hold up, but this was prior to us ever talking about it. They were just like, oh, I want to do some photo shoots. And so I put Milk and PJ on a thread, and I was like, I don't know the specs on this, but PJ already has something. And PJ's like, oh, that'll hold 2,500 pounds. And I was like, okay, well, I do not weigh 2,500 pounds. So that's good.
I mean,
I'm sure it'll hold me then. And so they came in with like all this rope and started talking about what suspension was like. And I was like, oh, damn, like that's actually what we're doing. And that part was really interesting because it was for me. And I think I have a fairly high, like, pain tolerance because people were saying like there's no comfortable way to be suspended and blah blah blah, and I think it's a combination of two things. I think milk is really good and like suspended my weight in like comfortable ways, but also like I have a fairly high pain tolerance, and like it didn't feel painful to me, you know, like in the way that like a lot of people described it. It was like kind of intense because you're holding your whole body weight up from like ropes, but it wasn't like particularly painful. But it was like intense enough that when they lowered me down, when they're like, okay, are you ready to come down now? And I said, yeah, they lowered me down. And there was this weird experience that I've never had anywhere else where like the second that my body hit the ground and the rope slackened, I almost felt like I was like melting into the ground because you go from all your body weight being on like really, it just becomes more diffuse, right? Like the way that your body weight is being held becomes so much more diffuse. So you feel this kind of like melting that was really a really intense and amazing experience. But like, that was the highlight for me, almost in the way that like, it's a cool experience when you're having sex, but then when you climax, it's like this like letting go of everything. And then you feel like so much different. I felt like it was something akin to that. Like you are like, wow, this is kind of interesting. This is neat. I'm having all these sensations. And then all of a sudden you're let down and you're like, whoa, I just like, my whole body just had this like release, which isn't orgasmic, but it has that kind of quality, you know?
That is so interesting and cool that like you came into this being like, okay, tying is bizarre. Just get to the point. And then I was like, yeah, but this is the point, this whole thing. And then to find out that like, actually it was the ceasing of that. Had that moment of release in it. That's so funny. Like that if you were going to point at anything as being the thing, it was the end. It was the ceasing.
Yeah.
It was when you weren't.
Where suddenly like the blood rushes back into your body and the parts that it was being like cut off. And it's this weird experience. But then Milk said when we had them on the interview, and this was true, that they kind of looked at me, and I think they're fairly intuitive, and was like, I don't think that was, I don't think she fully gets it. like I had that really cool experience, but she was like, I think she needs to have another experience. And so we have this chase, and that we've really only used for photo shoots in that studio. And they're like, we're going to tie you to this. And I was like, okay. And the pictures look less intense of that. But for me, that experience was like, the experience that if I was going to think back on it, I'd be like, oh, that was really amazing. And part of it was that I really like being touched. Like I really like, you know, being touched. And once I was stuck on this chair and couldn't move because they tied my like arms behind my back, so I couldn't move those. And I was just like lounging on this chair and my legs were tied to it. So there was really not like, I could move my head, but that was it. And they were like asking me like, can I scratch you? Can I touch you? Can I bite you? And I was like, yeah, go ahead. And I just consented to like all the things. And that was a really great experience for me, because I, especially in my work, am like in charge of everything. And like the vast, like, you know, all of these experiences that I have at work are me being in charge, me making sure that everything is going according to how my clients want them to go. You know, even if like scanning the room, trying to figure out, like, in very much what Milk did for me when they came in and was like, yeah, I did the thing you asked for, but I don't think that's really like what you like. I don't think you get it yet. So let's do this again, and there's something about that is like also what I do when I go into like work mode of like somebody's coming to me, they want to have an intense experience that they're putting a lot of weight and money into. How do I give them that? But I'm very on, for somebody else, for somebody else's fantasies, even if I enjoy it too, which I often do, but like it's not for me, it's for somebody else, even whatever my relationship too.
And even if they think they're asking for this, you're intuitive enough to know, like, actually they're asking for this. And that happens. Like, exactly. They called it this, but it's this thing over here. Like,
Yeah.
Oh, that must be so lovely to be on the receiving end.
It was.
That's delightful.
And I've always said that, like, I've never hired a sex worker for myself, but like I like the idea of it so that you can enter into an experience and have it be about you and not feel bad about that, And I felt like this was an experience that was like, that gave me the same satisfaction of like, we're going to do something that is for me and that I don't have to think about, that I don't have to direct, that I don't even have to tell them, like, give me this kind of experience. They're just like scanning, looking at my face and are like, yeah, let's pivot and do something else. Let's make sure you leave here understanding why people.
No, it sounds like they were very present and intuitive. Like they were very much like, what do you need? Like, I think you think you got it, but you didn't. I can tell.
Well, and that's the thing that like the person who has more experience, like I feel like this is a sex worker can do too, is like, you don't know what you don't know. Right. And so like, I probably would, if they didn't do the second part, I would have been like, oh, cool. I experienced that. Now I know what it's about, but I still don't. But I don't know that because I don't know like how intense that can be, And so I think it's neat to turn that over to somebody else and be like, okay, you show me what I need to know about this.
That's so exciting. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. I did not know that about this experience for you, that was really one of the first times of feeling. Yeah. Just feeling being the client. Yeah. That feeling. I was trying to find some other way to put it, but I'm like, there really isn't. Because,
and there's a way in our culture that we
reciprocity, and that's great. But like, this is really just, I can't. My hands are tied up. I'm sorry.
I'm like literally tied down. I can't do anything for you. Like,
even if I wanted to.
And
that's
there's a way that our culture speaks badly about clients. Like they're somehow like there's something wrong with them, or they're desperate, or they're socially inept, or all these things, which I have not proven to be true. Like they're myths, right?
Yeah.
But they're just people. They're just people, and there's something that feels they're just people. That's one thing. But I think that the other thing is that I've learned that there's like something so powerful about being able to do that, to enter into a space that is about and claim your own like pleasure. And I've often thought that with clients, I've often thought like, oh, how nice. Like I love being able to give that to somebody, but it's not that easy to figure out how to like get that for yourself. And so I mean, it's the same thing. It's like why I like getting massages, and I like getting massages because I mean, obviously it's pleasant, but like, it's not just that it's pleasant. It's that it's like an hour that I'm not doing something, like that somebody else is doing something for me that I really like. And every once in a while I'll have like a client or even somebody that I've like seen who's like, oh, well, I'll give you a massage. And I'm like, that's not the same thing, because somebody it's that I'm
the same thing.
No, somebody that even my partner, somebody that I'm having sex with who is giving me a massage. ultimately is going to want to turn this into like a sexual experience that's going to require reciprocity. And that's fine. Like, I mean, it's great. Like reciprocal, like love and exchange and sex is amazing. But sometimes you just want to do something that you want to do and have it not turn into
the
that.
Reciprocity in like, okay, in peer-to-peer sex, which is the sex that most people are having. Most people are having sex with their peers and, you know, and it's the whole thing is founded on reciprocity.
Right.
But like,
which is beautiful and
great. My partner is giving me a massage, unless we have a really deep understanding or previously arranged for this, they kind of want me to be present with them.
Yeah.
And, you know, be aware of how they themselves as individuals are touching me.
Right.
When I go to a massage therapist, all I have to focus on is how I feel, which usually ends up being a very emotional experience and doesn't have much to do with the physical at all. But like, I'm not really focused on if my massage therapist, you know, knows that I think they're doing a good job. I'm paying them.
Right.
Like, I'm not worried about how they feel about it or if I made the right sounds for them or, you know, like, did I relax so much I farted? Like, I don't really worry about that with a massage therapist because I paid them for their time in their space and I can just be on me and like, you know, it's
and that's actually how the massage therapists want it. You know, it's actually interesting. So there's a they don't want to be responsible for how you feel about them or whatever. They just want to come in and do their job that they're there to do. And there's a really great piece in Tits and Sass written by Charlotte Shane that's called Getting Away with Hating It, where she's talking about why the notion of like, it's a great piece. I recommend it. But she talks about why the notion of enthusiastic consent should be like troubled because that gets pushed so much in like sex positivity. And there's good reasons for like enthusiastic consent. But what she says is like, there's also a lot of reasons why we consent to sex that we don't feel enthusiastic about, and throwing that all out is as like illegitimate is also like problematic. And so she brings up like, I mean, obviously she's getting at like, as a provider, it's usually not about her. And the idea that like, it's somehow wrong because she's not like super stoked about like every single encounter puts her in this really weird position. But also she's like, what about the couple who is trying to have a baby and they're having infertility problems and they're trying over and over again? Are they excited about the sex every time? No, not as a thing in itself.
Or are they excited about the outcome or the, you know, and there's really like, I got to say as a woman in perimenopause, there's nothing wrong with maintenance sex. It's a real thing. And at the end of the day, that you still have that accumulated time spent. And I'm saying this from a place of both doing that and not doing that. And you know that when we were not doing that, we were not getting any closer. You know, it's like there's something to be said for
for being there with another person.
About this exact moment, no, but I'm enthusiastic as hell about us and about us being closer and being a more bonded pair and, you know, all of these effects from this. So like,
but one of
those results.
And that's really important. She talks about that. But one of the other things she talks about is that like the worst clients for her are not the ones who like demand the most, you know, or anything. They're actually the ones who want her to enjoy it, like who are very like, who are like, I want this to be good for you too. And she's like, that's a whole, like, even if it is good for her,
that's
like
a whole thing.
That's a whole thing to try to like make sure that you think that I like it, which is exactly what you're saying about like when you're at a massage therapist, you don't want to be thinking like, you're not trying to manage their experience.
That I'm relaxed enough. Yeah. Do they think that I'm enjoying this? Do they think that I'm having a good enough time? Do they know that I appreciate how they're touching me?
And say like, am I being a good client? Am I doing the things that like you want? Am I this or that? That's actually so much harder because it requires so much more like emotional maintenance than just coming in and allowing yourself to be taken care of. You know, and absolutely. I don't know. This has gone in so many different directions.
I think that's a really good place to wrap up. Just sometimes it's okay for you to just let yourself be taken care of.
Yeah. And that's what I got out of this. Like, I really liked, like, and with rope, it's so tangible. Like, you actually can't do anything. And there was something that I got a lot out of that experience.
That's so cool. Yeah. I love that so much. All right. That was a really long and really fun reflection on the last 2 episodes of When We're Not Hustling. That was with Milk and Honey.
Yeah.
And
Honey
no, we did not plan that, but it really is pretty great.
Yeah. Oh, Milk and Honey. You're right.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I didn't put that together. Right? That's amazing.
And we are the after party of When We're Not Hustling. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and follow us on socials at Not Hustling Pod.
Yep.